was on the morning star when everything was still. Days I spent in school, classmates were cool, laughed at me when I spoke of voices.
Hello.
Merrell Fankhauser, welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Russell.
Let's talk about the song Wipeout before we get into our big conversation of the day, which is the lost continent of Mu. But the song Wipeout, everybody knows that riff. What part in that song did you play?
Well, I was a guitar player, and I was playing with a band called the Impacts in 1961, and we played at the biggest auditorium at the time between Los Angeles and San Francisco in Pismo Beach called the Rose Garden Ballroom that held about 1,500 people. And every weekend we'd get a lot of teenagers dancing, and I was a surfer at the time, and the word surf music hadn't even been coined yet, and we were just playing these instrumentals of the day by the Ventures and the Champs and Dwayne Eddy, and I started writing songs and putting surfing titles to them, instrumentals. And one day I was surfing on the right side of the pier and just sort of daydreaming when a big wave took me over the falls, dragged me along the bottom, and I got up, got all the sand out of my eyes and my ears and my nose, and our sax player was on the beach sitting there with a lot of pretty girls that were up against the break wall, and he said, "Did you see that Merrell really got wiped out?" Trying to embarrass me. So I went up, cleaned myself up, put the surfboard in the car, and I'd already had a song called Kick Out that had that riff that you just hummed, and we had been playing it at the Rose Garden Ballroom, and I noticed, a lot of people really getting into the surfing sort of dance thing that they did back then. So anyhow, I was driving home, and I thought, Wipeout, that might be a better title for that song. So I changed Kick Out to Wipeout. Shortly thereafter, we were discovered by a talent scout from Delphi Records from Los Angeles, and these two producers took us into the studio in L.A., and in about 6-7 hours, we recorded a whole album, which ended up being released on Delphi Records as the Impact's Wipeout. Well, I'd written the song Wipeout, and it started out with the drum roll, but we didn't have drums all the way through the song. And they put the album out that way, and that was in September of 1962. Then they called us back down to the studio a few months later and said, we think that Wipeout song would be a hit, only we want you to put drum rolls in every other verse. And we thought, that's kind of dumb. But we went down and we did it anyway, and we recorded some other extra songs that came out on different surf instrumental compilation albums that was starting to, make some smoke, and people were really getting into the instrumental thing. Well, unbeknownst to us, a publisher and producer manager, young guy, was learning the ropes of publishing from the two older producers that were producing us, and he took our song much later, months later, and started publishing a group called the Surfaris, and he played them our version, and they did the version with all of the drum solos through, and their version came out almost a year after ours. I think it was in May of '63, and they thought they'd changed it enough to claim it theirself. But they had these two, I call them now song sharks, Russell, these two older producers. We knew nothing about copywriting or publishing songs, and we just signed our songs over to them. So they were getting the royalties from us and the royalties from the Safaris, and we were getting nothing. And it just caused a big controversy, and several other bands recorded the song later. Ours was in ASCAP, the American Songwriters body that collects your airplay royalties. Long story short, I complained to Delphi Records, and in 1994, they put our album out on a CD, and I ended up finding out that our copyright expired, and I re-signed the copyright and finally got the rights to my version back in 1994, and from then on I started getting a trickle of royalties, but nothing like it would have been if I would have got it from the beginning. So that's the whole story, and I just kept going after that.
If I was to mention surf music to someone, the two bands they might be able to mention are the Ventures and Safaris.
Yeah.
You could have been one of the two. But if I look it up, the song Wipeout on Wikipedia, it says songwriters Bob Berryhill, Pat Connolly, Jim Fuller, and Ron Wilson.
Well, I wrote the original version in 1962, almost a year before they did theirs, and as I mentioned, their future manager and publisher, Richard Delvey, was in our recording session when we recorded the song, and he got a copy of it and played it for the Safaris, but they figured changing it enough and putting drum solos all the way through gave them the rights to it. And, they had the hit. Our album eventually sold 1 million copies, but it took many years to do it, and had we had our version with the drum solos out first when we recorded it, who knows, maybe history would be different.
So how do you reconcile with that personally?
Yeah, I was 17 years old when I did that, Russell, and the other guitar player in the band, Martin Brown, never got over it. Years later, I would have a few beers with him, and he would be crying in his beer about it and how we got ripped off. Well, by then, I had already done 3 or 4 other albums, and I went into my own style of vocal music, first with Merrell and the Exiles, and then I kept recording in a studio out in the desert in Palmdale where Captain Beefheart and Frank Zappa were from, and I got into the psychedelic folk era, and unbeknownst to me, years later, an album that had mostly Merrell and the Exiles songs on it, and I changed the name to Fapper-Dockley to make it sound more psychedelic. That album is now a very valuable collector's item and well sought after, and the Germans looked me up in the 70s and told me that a sealed copy of that album was worth $1,000 a copy. I had no idea. I was living in my cabin on Maui. And then I did an interview with an Australian DJ a couple of years ago, and he said, well, he knows somebody that bought one for $1,495. So that spurred me to keep going on, and collectors contacting me, and then after that I formed HMS Bounty, which we had a hit called Things, and then after that I formed the band Moo, And we had 2 albums out with that group that did fairly well. And at that point in 1973 is when we decided to move to the island of Maui, because legend had it that it was the mountain peak of the lost continent of Mu.
You had an interest in Mu, so you ended up naming the band Mu.
Yeah, we found the book by Colonel James Churchward where he had explored in the Yucatan, and it was in that book that he said all the Hawaiian islands were the mountain peaks of Mu. And I thought, wow, that would be a great name for the band after HMS Bounty broke up. And I was living in a suburb of Los Angeles in Woodland Hills at the time, because I was playing down there in L.A., and we named the band Mu and got a record deal, and that album, the first Mu album, has been released on, counting foreign releases, I think maybe 9 different labels. It's Germany, England, Greece, Spain, Brazil, several labels in the United States.
I came the day I heard it thunder. There she was, just standing by herself. When she came, she brought me flowers and baby. That's not all she did for my health. She made me well. I was sick and tired of being nobody.
Okay, when you say Mu, what lost continent are you referring to? Because there's Atlantis, Lemuria, I've heard Zealandia.
Well, Mu is short for Lemuria. And, I found all of these ruins when I moved to Hawaii in 73, because I was just so into this by then. I was looking up everything I could find about Mu, and I started talking to the old Hawaiians on the island, and they all got a twinkle in their eye when I told them that I was interested in this. And this one older Hawaiian took me out to this trail that went down to this valley on Maui out in the jungle, and he said, go down there and you'll see something that I think you'll be interested in. And it wasn't just an ordinary trail. It looks like, or almost like they'd been made on a milling machine, stone steps going down into this valley. And he wouldn't go down there. He was sort of almost afraid. He said that was kapu, which meant forbidden. And he said he used to play down there when he was a little kid, and his parents said, you better not go down there or the Mu people will get you and take you away. So I went down these steps. I came to this pristine waterfall with these 4 pillars standing in a semicircle on what looked like a Mayan or Incan cut stone platform. And I went, what in the world is this? Because all of the Hawaiian structures are basically volcanic boulders, that they stack up and put a thatched roof on. And one of the pillars had broken off and was laying in this pool. And what struck me is they looked almost Grecian, because they had these carved, I call them knurled, sides going up the columns. And they were about 35 feet tall. And then I noticed over to the left, going under the how bush, which is this giant, like hibiscus plant, there was a stone sidewalk leading down to the ocean. And in some places I had to crawl on my hands and knees under these bushes to follow the sidewalk, and I saw it go out under the water as far as I could see, about 75 feet out, and then the ancient lava flow had flowed over that sidewalk. So I knew that that sidewalk was older than that lava flow, which was believed to be maybe 1,000 years old in that area. So when I climbed back up, I found a good vantage point with my camera, and I got a picture of one of the pillars from the side. And that picture and some other pictures of things I found is in my book, Calling from a Star, the Merrell Fankhauser story, which is available at Amazon.
Archaeologists assert that Mu is pseudo-archaeology. How do you feel about that?
Well, having been to Hawaii, talked to the Hawaiians, actually touched some of these ruins, I found a pyramid in Haleakala crater at 10,500 feet that was partially submerged under that ancient lava flow. And then the Hawaiians told me on the desolate side of Maui, where there are all these other stone structures that the lava has flowed over, the Hawaiians call it the King's Burial Ground, and they say there was a white race with blonde and reddish hair living there when the Hawaiians came from Tahiti. So something was going on there, you know, if the archaeologists want to discount that and a lot of other things. Even the South American and some of the North American Indian tribes say they came from a now submerged continent in the Pacific Ocean. So I just feel that there's something to it. And I'm in touch with Churchward's grandson now, and he's written a book trying to prove some of the things that his grandfather found. And so there's, you know, two sides to the story, and I just know that what I saw over there was something that the Hawaiians didn't build, so somebody was there.
If the Hawaiians didn't make them, who did?
The jury's out on that. Nobody says. It's like they kind of want to just sweep it under the rug. The interesting thing is that the Parks Department, you can walk through a trail through Haleakala Crater, but they tell you not to get off the trail. And I was walking through the trail with my band, and I looked out into the lava flow, and I said, "Look, guys, that looks like a pyramid." And I went off the trail. They were afraid to leave the trail, and I had to jump several deep chasms to get to this thing. And it was about 40, 50 feet out of the lava flow, and I climbed up on the side of it, and I got such vertigo, it took me a while to even get down, and I got a position where I could get a picture of it. And at a certain time of the day, it blends into the lava flow, and you can't even see it. I went up there after, and tried to find it again, and I couldn't see it, and I was at the wrong part of the time of the day. Well, the Parks Department ended up letting the National Geographic Society go up there with a powered auger and bore a hole in the side of it, which I was really surprised. And they concluded that it was a bigger structure that went under the lava flow. And then out in the King's Burial Ground that I was talking about, the road ends on one part of Maui because the lava just flows over it and you can't go any further, and there's like a trail you notice out looking towards the mountain side of the crater, all of these rock formations that are under the lava. And about 7 miles out, on a near a red cinder cone, there's a big Hawaiian building that's very, very big. It's a large building. And over in the floor, there's a hole in some rickety ladder that somebody built. A Hawaiian fisherman told me about this, and he was scared to death to go that far out. They'll go out along the beach and go fishing, but before dark, they make sure they're out of there. So I went down in this hole, and there's like a cellar down there. And it had all of this cut stone floor, walls, and even ceiling, and 2 more of these pillars that were on the other side of the island. Same structure there. So whoever built these, either had some tools that weren't invented yet, or I don't know. It's a mystery, and I still think about it all the time. But I put a lot of these pictures of these things in the book, and somebody from National Geographic went out into that area about 2 years ago and took pictures of them and published it in National Geographic. And the guy, I think he was British, he acted like he was the first person that knew about it, and nobody had ever discovered it before.
It's Delphi Records all over again.
Yeah. And when I was on, I think when I was on with either George Norrie or John B. Wells, a couple emailed me after hearing me and said, "We're on Maui right now on vacation. How do we get to these ruins?" And I told them, it's very treacherous. You got to have hiking boots, good clothes, and lots of water, because it gets very hot out there. And, that black lava, there isn't any palm trees to get under out there. So they went out there and went exploring, and 3 days later I got an email from the guy, and he said, "You're right, it was very treacherous." And I did get some pictures of some of the ruins, but my wife got heat exhaustion, and he said they were lucky to make it back to the car. So it's interesting that young Hawaiians have heard me on the radio and have emailed me and said, "My parents have never told me about any of this that exists out there," and they find it very odd.
So there's no tours operating that show this area? You just have to know about it?
Oh, yeah. No, you couldn't go on a tour, Russell, because it's so treacherous, these trails, and then a big hill of lava will come over the trail, and you got to climb over this hill, and there's a stone rock wall that goes along the trail in spots, but it's very, very difficult, and it's just too treacherous to try to do. It was actually kind of crazy of me, and I had a couple of people go with me, but we had to actually camp out there because we got so exhausted for one night before we could walk back. And we heard all of these strange sounds, and I think that's what the Hawaiians are afraid of. They said there's sounds like babies crying, and I think it's the wind going through all of these odd, rock formations that have been formed by the lava.
And there's no way to date these things, is there? You can't date rock.
No, but the pillars on the other side, I heard that a German expedition went to the one in the jungle, and they claimed they had some way of carbon dating it to be over 10,000 years old. And the other interesting thing, there was a stone axe head found in this King's Burial Ground area, and it's in the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, And after a lot of research, they feel that it was a Viking axe head.
The Vikings were in the Pacific Ocean?
I don't know. That's the first I heard of it. It seems like they went everywhere, if that is true.
Do you think it was all a part of this one world civilization that that somehow rose to prominence, and maybe there was a great cataclysm and everything fell apart?
Well, that's what they claimed, that, Atlantis was the motherland of, connected to Mu, and when Atlantis went down and then the cataclysm, that's what Churchward said, and the ring of fire of volcanoes going off, then Mu sank also, and some of the people that were living there somehow made it over here to the mainland. And we know that part of California was underwater, because even here on the Central Coast where I live, you can drive 30 miles inland and find things like fossilized starfish. And clear into Las Vegas, they've found, ocean-type fossils that are there. So the old Earth has gone through a lot of changes, and I think it's going through a change right now, the way all the weather is changing all over the planet, and volcanoes are going off again.
Have you really noticed that, though, a big change in the weather, this climate change thing?
Yeah, and I don't think it's all due to fossil fuels, because many scientists have said that the poles in the last decade have shifted quite a bit, which is changing. It's been colder here this winter. I moved back from Hawaii in '87, and I feel like this winter is the coldest winter I ever felt here on the Central Coast. I mean, one night I checked my thermometer and it was 35 degrees, and I don't think I've ever seen that here before.
You wouldn't survive a day in Canada.
That's what they say.
It was a clear and blustery day down by the ocean. Two silver saucers appeared on the horizon. Me and my friends, we stared in amazement. Could this be the place we've seen in our dreams? We were on our way to Hana, passing by Wailua Bay. And the sky was full of flowers, and the people smiled away.
So how's the music business been for you lately? I understand there's a bit of a resurgence of interest into surf music. Or have your musical aspirations widened?
Well, I've still been just progressively, I did some albums with my own style of Hawaiian music, and they call it Hawaiian rock. And then all of a sudden, about 5-6 years ago, DJs from all over started writing me and saying, when are you going to do another instrumental surf album? And so there was a DJ, Rockin' Robert Hutchinson. in Cincinnati, and he played everything that I did that was instrumental surf. And he said, you need to do another surf album and call it Rockin' and Surfin'. So I followed his lead, and I did the first one, and it ended up getting out on a Japanese label, which instrumental surf is really big in Japan. And I wrote a whole, new album's worth, and it started getting play on about 300 radio stations. And so a couple of years later, I did another one, and I'm now up to volume 4 of Rockin' and Surfin', and they're still getting played on the radio. And my new album, I had an album come out 2 years ago now that was taken from my Tiki Lounge TV show, and it's called Tiki Lounge Live, and it's on Golden Lane Records, a label in L.A., and then I got my song Calling from a Star on a British compilation album called Eclectia, and that's all bands and artists from the USA, Canada, and UK that believe their music was inspired by UFOs. So that came out, and now the new album I did is called Oceans of Intelligence, and it's kind of, I would call it spiritual in a way. It has that feeling of Mu. And in 1975, when I was living on Maui, I was studying Tibetan Buddhism, and the Tibetan lamas came over to Maui, and we had an initiation ceremony, and I got to play music for them, which was really neat, with my violinist, Mary Lee. And they gave me the name Lodru Jansau, which translates in English to Oceans of Intelligence. And I never knew if I had Oceans of Intelligence or that was my dharma. I was supposed to study that. So after quite a few years, I wrote a song around 1985, I think it was, called Oceans of Intelligence, and it came out on a limited edition vinyl. And now I've added more strings and orchestration to it, and I've used it as the title of this new album that I'm shopping to labels right now. And we just finished it.
In the movie Chappaquiddick, you've made a song for that one, too.
Yeah, that was from the Fapper Dockley album. I ended up having an agent contact me from Hollywood that specializes in placing songs in movies and TV, and they picked my song Lila, which is actually like a folk rock song, and they put it in a beach scene in the movie Chappaquiddick, and that was nice. And recently, the agent got 3 of my 60s and 70s songs in a TV miniseries called The Truth About the Harry Kubert Affair. And it was on Showtime and a bunch of those movie channels, which I've never seen it. But before that, back in 95, I had a song called Only a Woman in a movie with Ned Beatty called Shadows in the Storm. And then I was playing guitar on a song called Comanche that ended up in Pulp Fiction. And there's a lot of surf movies that have different surf songs in it, and that's very lucrative, and sometimes you can make almost more money off of a song being in a movie than you do off of it being released. And I remember I was sitting in Steve Miller's living room once, and we were watching TV, and he had one of those little hand numbering devices, a clicker. And his song, Fly Like an Eagle, was used in a Dodge commercial. And he went, well, there's another $73. And he said that he made $500,000 one year off of that song being in that commercial. And he said it's more than the record made.
Unreal.
Yeah. So I'm hoping for more of those, Russell. I got a new agent now in New York that's working on placing some of my songs. I've got over 400 songs, so there's a lot to pick from, and they seem to want these older vintage songs for these period piece movies like Chappaquiddick.
Something that hasn't been played on the radio a million times.
Yeah, lately, or something somebody may remember from back then, but they even wanted to know if I had unreleased songs from that period, and there were a couple that had never been out that I had on a tape and transferred it digitally, and that one of those songs, Let Me Go, is in this Truth About the Harry Kubert Affair.
So what inspired you to play guitar and to form a band? I mean, the music industry has changed so much. It is very difficult to make money now. Certainly with, album sales must be negligible. So as I understand, the money is in touring.
Yeah, and I've slowed down on touring. I was doing a lot of it for a lot of years, and I always had a trickle of royalties coming in from, all these songs. But it is a different world now, but album sales have come back now, and I'm finding a lot of these labels want to reissue my older stuff on albums because vinyl has come back, and last year they said vinyl outsold CDs.
Wow.
But now with all this downloading and everything, and there are things being downloaded that us, the songwriter artist, sometimes we don't get paid because they just don't account for it. So that's the bad things about, the online internet thing. And they can grab stuff from wherever. And this even happened with Best Buy. And I was on a class action suit with them, and we won, and Rod Stewart and a lot of other people were in it. And now there's one going on with Spotify. They've taken a lot of our songs and never bothered to even let us know they were selling them. Did I answer your question? I veered off there.
No, it's okay. I was curious, though, as to what got you interested in playing guitar.
Oh, yeah. Playing guitar, how that started.
Yeah, and who inspired you to play? Who do you think are some of the better players?
Well, my dad taught me when I was 11 years old. He played 5-string banjo in a Dixieland band, and my mom was a big band singer. And so I always had music in the house, and I remember on my 11th birthday, they bought me a ukulele, and that was my first instrument, and I was living in Kentucky then, and then we moved out here to California, and at age 14, I got an acoustic guitar, and then I was working as a cleanup boy and the marquee guy that sets up the marquee for the next movie at a local movie theater, and I was sitting in the empty auditorium there in front of the screen because it had a nice echo, and I remember I was playing Poor Little Fool on the guitar by Ricky Nelson, and the manager heard me and he said, "Hey, you've got a good voice and you play pretty good. How would you like to get up in between the two matinees and do a few songs?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, great." And he said, "I'll give you $12." And I said, wow, does that mean I still get my $40 a week for cleaning up? Oh, yeah. And I thought, man, I'm rich now. So the first performance I did, there was a lot of, young teenagers in there, and they were all yelling and everything. And I went out front to the concession stand, and I got backed up against the popcorn machine by a bunch of teenage girls that wanted my autograph. And right away I thought, I think I'm in show business now. So then a group of students at Roy Grande High School were forming a band, and I joined the band, and that band was the Impacts, and I went on from there. But who inspired me, actually, some of the early teenage idols like Ricky Nelson and, of course, Elvis Presley, and then people like Carl Perkins that wrote Blue Suede Shoes, and some songs that the Beatles even did. And I got to meet Carl in about 1985, and that was just great, meeting him and getting to tell him how his music inspired me. And then, of course, I met the Ventures, played on the same stage with them, and I remember Noki Edwards, the lead guitar player, showed me the chords to one of their songs that I couldn't figure out, called Gandhi Dancer, and that was really cool, too. And that was the neat thing about the Ventures, and I sort of followed their lead. Instead of just doing the three basic chords, like as in Wipeout and a lot of those other songs, they had minors and major seventh chords and things, and which later on the Beatles started doing in their songs. So, it took it out of that 12-bar blues kind of feeling that, was used so much into different things. And I remember one of the people from the movie Chappaquiddick told me Lila was almost like a classical piece of music, and I wrote that when I was about 24, I think.
So tell me about the book, Calling from a Star, and that's your biography. I mean, you've had almost 50 albums, so there must be a lot in there.
Yeah, I started out, as I mentioned, when I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and how I started playing guitar and worked on up to almost present day. And it covers most of the albums and different people I've played with. And as we mentioned, my ancient ruins that I found in Hawaii. And, I try to let other musicians know things to watch out for now, because I learned a lesson, as I mentioned, when I was 17 years old, very early, having a whole album, taken from me without any copyright or anything, and never getting any royalties from it for many years.
How many songs do you think you've written?
Oh, gosh. I'd say I've written somewhere over 500, because there's songs that I wrote that I totally forgot about that were found in a studio up in the desert in Palmdale. And I went up there because the sons of the studio owner, the owner had passed away, and they noticed this box of tapes that had my name on it. And I went up there and got them and started listening to the tapes, and totally forgot that I'd written maybe 40 or 50 songs that were there. And I ended up making a deal with a label in Germany, Morning Dew Records, to put them out as the Lost Desert tapes. And they put it out on vinyl. Well, just recently, a tape was found in a studio on Maui. It must have been a song I was writing and forgot about, called Crystal Blue Ocean. They sent me the tape, and it was from 1977, and I totally forgot about it. So as a little oddity, I put that on the new album.
Tell me about the process. Like, how long does it take in general to write a song? And do you just make riffs and then match it up with some lyrics you've written and think, okay, those two will go together? Or is it always written together, the lyrics and the music?
I get a feeling comes over me, and I hear a song, or somebody will say something, and the title will automatically make me think of a song, and I hear it in my head, and I either got to run to a piece of paper and start writing it down, or turn on. I used to keep a cassette player next to my bed, because I'd wake up, I'd written songs in dreams, and start singing it into the tape recorder and writing it down. And an interesting thing, back in the 70s, I was friends with the great singer-songwriter Harry Nilsson. We both wrote for a publishing company together in the 60s. He invited me to a party he was having, and I walk in, had my acoustic guitar, and he said, "This is my friend Merrell Fankhauser. He's going to sing a song for us." And there were about 30 people there. And I look over in the corner, and I went, "That looks like John Lennon." Well, Harry and John were friends, and John was sitting there. I got a little nervous, and my lips started twitching. And I played this song off of my 1976 solo Maui album called On Our Way to Hana. And after I wrote the song, John said, "That's an interesting song. How did you get inspired to write that?" So once we started talking, I got over the nervousness, and everybody went over to the bar and to the food table, and I had a chance to talk to him for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And he said, "Isn't songwriting weird?" He said, "You never know where a song is going to come from, and it'll just pop in, and you got to get it down as fast as you can, or it goes away." And I said, "Yeah, my best songs are written in 15 minutes, to answer your question." He said, "Mine too." And he called it automatic writing. And he said something very funny to me. He said, "I didn't write any of those songs in the Beatles." And I went, "What?" He said, "Yeah, they were given to me by my muse." So that's the thing. And I've talked to other people that they say their best songs are written, in 15 minutes. And if somebody talks to you when you're getting this, or you hear another piece of music, it can completely take that away. So I don't sit down, like you said, and start doing riffs and then write songs to it. I'm lucky. It's a gift. They're given to me. But now that's different than the music nowadays. I know different producers and people that write these songs on computers. They just put up some drum beats, and they may even use the same bass and piano part from another song and just write different lyrics and melody to it. So, and if you notice, a lot of these songs are two chords just going back and forth, that sometimes they don't even have a bridge or a decent instrumental. When Harry and I were writing for this music publisher in Hollywood, they told us 2 verses, a bridge, an instrumental, back to the bridge, 2 verses, and then a strong hook line going out. And you had to get all of that done in 2.5 minutes back then. And that was a formula for writing a hit song. And if you listen to all of the old songs like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, when clear up to the Beatles, that was the formula for hit songs then.
What would be the most nerve-wracking thing is working with a label, and they tell you, okay, you got to make an album within 6 months, and there needs to be a hit, and we need a... Like, how would you do that as a musician?
I did it when I was with HMS Bounty, but it was still more of that inspired thing that came across. And I remember my friend Sky Saxon from a band called The Seeds. He was always complaining, they're trying to turn us into a bubblegum group, and I'm not going to do it, and that was everybody's fear, that when the psychedelic movement came in, they wanted to be different and do these long solos, but no, the record company wanted these short little ditties that sounded like hits that were radio friendly until FM music came along. But everybody's fear, you would meet them, at a coffee shop or something. Yeah, we're mad at the label. They're trying to turn us into a bubblegum group, So that was something. And I got a song called A Visit with a Shia. I was playing the sitar, and I'd learned to play the sitar, and I kind of had to influence the record label president to let me put this song on, because it was, more like that Eastern Indian raga rock, they called it. And I got the song on the HMS Bounty album.
Do you have a website?
Yes.
So if you could tell the audience again about your book, Calling from a Star, it's available on Amazon, so I just did it for you. And then your website. It's
merrellfankhauser.com, MERRELLFANKHAUSER.com. I'm on Facebook, and I've got, I think over 3,000 friends there, and it's a good thing, because I get feedback on all the music and what they like and what they have of mine. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you, Merrell. Thank you so much for your time. Of course, the audience is going to be able to listen to your music as we chat here. Merrell Fankhauser, thank you so much for being a guest. Thank you so much, Russell, and we'll be in touch. Love is all there is. Nothing else is real. So you might as well give yourself to love. Nothing can be more. Nothing else for sure. All